Well, hello. My name is Derek Stewart. I'm an instructor here at Sitting Bull College in the Education Department. I originally was an art teacher and started my career at McLaughlin School, I did Little Eagle School, teaching art, and then got my master's in special education, and then pursued that, teaching that, and then eventually moved up at the college. And I teach in the early childhood department. Last year, I finished my doctoral degree in educational leadership. Right now, I'm currently mostly teaching education courses. However, one of my biggest passions is art, and I try to still teach as much art, especially locally, to the community, and also do outreach to the local schools in Native American art. This course is medicine shields, which are different than traditional like war shield that one would typically associate a shield as being. So a medicine shield would be like a more spiritual than like a shield that would use in battle. It would be something that would give you good medicine. It would reflect, traditional beliefs and values that associated with that person, whether that be some kind of an animal or through like a vision quest, or also indications of something that would be spiritual through like a medicine man. And that then would be replicated onto your medicine shield to give you good medicine and to protect you. Very symbolic, what's the word I'm looking for? Symbolism, things like that. Now, in a contemporary context, you can make these using a lot of same processes that you would do historically. However, in like a contemporary society, like I made several shields for my kids, medicine shields. So my two older kids are my step kiddos, and their last name's Spotted Bear, and this is my oldest son's. So I would replicate that as his image, and then these are decorations then that would be that they hang up in their bedrooms, and I associate them the same way as they would have historically. Like I make them, and symbolically, I think it protects them and guards them. But also it uses for a really nice decoration and something that could then be passed down, to the grandkids eventually someday, and something that, you'd hold and cherish throughout, your upbringing. So I still think of it as the same way as something that would protect my children symbolically. This is my daughter Haley's right here. There's different ways you can do it. I mean, you can go with, traditional patterns and designs, or something that would be more contemporary, or something that would be associated with your child. Like I said, this is my daughter's, and this is more of like a Southwestern design pattern that she really liked, and she really likes fishes, so I incorporated that on the bottom, and then changed up the colors instead of red to pink. So there's another example. And then this is my son's here. My youngest son, Jasper's. This is a little bit larger, that would probably resemble the size of like an actual bigger shield, like a war shield. However, it's still considered a medicine shield because the techniques are that of what you use for a medicine shield. So this uses thin deer hide opposed to like a thick buffalo hide, typically like the neck, shoulder, something that'd be thicker, would have been used for like a shield that would have went into battle. And because of its thickness, it could protect from arrows, and also historically, like old bullets would glance off if done correctly. That is a very different process where you'd have to know how to actually like work the hide, and that is something that I'm not familiar with. But for a medicine shield, we have deer hide, which would have been used. It's thinner, it's more malleable, easier to work with, and also it stretches very nice to a small ring. Traditionally, you would use like a willow or a soft wood that could be bent really easily. Today, we see a lot of these metal rings being used, same with like dream catchers opposed to like a wooden hoop. They work great, easily accessible. However, if you want to go more accurate, more traditional, you can do the process where you find wood from like a willow, something that can be easily bent. I would fasten it first into the shape that you want, and also have it wrapped around something circular, so that way when it dries, you don't lose your round shape, because it will bevel otherwise. But if you look at an older traditional shield historically, it wouldn't have been perfectly round. You might have a little bit of bend to it, and depending on how tight you do this, you might get it where it has a bevel or shape. So if you look at this one that I made for my son, Hunter Spotted Bear, it's bent a little bit, and that actually I like because it looks like a real historical shield. And then you can do the 4 directions, and that's usually what I recommend for your back lacing. Kind of similar to that of how you'd make a drum if you ever made a drum before. This is one technique that you can use, and also symbolic with the 4 directions. However, you don't have to. Some of these, this one is much smaller, so I didn't even do that on there. But it all depends on how accurate or how traditional you want to get with your artwork compared to how contemporary you do. And then same with this, you have your lacing with the 4 directions. And this is all deer hide. Where I get my hide at is Dakota Emporium, which is in Fort Pierre? Yep. Right? Fort Pierre across the river there. It's native owned, really good place. Another place too that's great to get your rawhide is Centennial Fur out of Montana. If you order that online and if you're enrolled, you can put your enrollment number in. You get a discount on all your purchases. You can get any kind of hide for any kind of project through that company. Also, if I get everybody's email, if you would send that to Jen, I can give you a description here of some iconography that goes into more detail about the variations between a medicine shield and a shield that would be used for battle, like a war shield. It kind of gives you dimensions, diameters, the process. It's a quick, brief overview. Then also here I added an artist, David Hoff, Grinstone, member of Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Punk Papa Band, and it also kind of talks about, you know, showcasing a local artist who does shields, does drums. I think is always important to showcase. You know, I do this to help revitalize the local arts, but it's not something that I do every single day. But there are plenty of artists out there that are continuing this process and very well known for their art. Then here you have an overview of how he describes it. Here, shields are ancient ceremonial tools providing protection from that which would harm or divert one from good paths, bringing strength, healing through one's power, spiritual animals, and beings, and Mother Earth elements. So this is a local artist that I found online that kind of gives you a little more content between the medicine shield and also to artists that are actually doing it today, which I think is very important. So anyways, if you have the email, I can share this information with you. And then also here, you can get started in the actual process. So what I use is, you know, paper bags from like grocery stores or something like that. I'll use my stencil. Depending on the diameter of your ring, I can kind of walk you through this at the same time because we'll have to soak your hide. It will be about 1 inch all the way around, which should give you enough space for when it over. And then when I punch the holes 1 inch all the way around until you have it here. And then when you have your hide, I give you a pencil too, right? And I'll give you a whole bunch. Okay. All right, still getting things organized. Thank you. Yep. So what you're going to do then is you have your stencil. You're going to want to, you don't have to punch the holes out, but you're going to take your rawhide. Like I said, this is deer, and try to utilize as much as you can, even the small scraps. If you ever seen or you wear earrings that are of rawhide, they can always be used for smaller pieces of artwork that you could then wear for your gear to kind of maximize the hide in the animal and pay it respect in that regard to use up as much as you possibly can. One thing that you want to watch out for when you're doing this, just like if you ever made a drum before, is these thinner spots here are going to have a tendency more to tear. So you want to get it as far past that as possible to not include that. And also that kind of compromises the area for your painting or decoration. And what we'll start off here first is we'll outline our stencil will it's ready to be cut. And I usually do this at least with deer hide when it's dry. You can also do it when it's wet. But this deer hide is so thin that it's okay to do it both. It won't tear. It's personal preference. A lot of people, if you're making something bigger like a drum, they might soak it first, the hide, before they cut, to make sure that you don't get any splices that would then compromise your ring. And then after you do that, you want to just follow your line as closely as you can and keep cutting it. Deer, you can use just a traditional scissors. If you make anything else using different, like elk or buffalo, you're going to have to use a different type of scissors, or even like a cutter, because it's going to be much thicker than this. And then once you cut that out all the way, you then put your stencil on top. And if you punch out those holes on there, I then will use my pencil here, and I'll circle those holes so I know where to punch out for my lacing. I usually try to get in at least 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 inch, depending how big your shield's going to be for the holes. That way you can ensure that it's not going to tear out on you. Then it should look like that. And if you're using the actual hole punch, you can do it when it's dry. If you're going to use an awl, which looks like this, an awl that looks like this, I would recommend first soaking it, because this has a tendency more to create a split, especially when it's dry opposed to when it's wet. But if you have an actual hole punch, you can use that tool when it's dry, and that would be your best option. That's what I've done here, and I've also done on this example. One of the more harder things to find is probably the feathers. You can put feathers, you can put horsehair. Traditionally, there'd be components even like sage or sweetgrass, something that would provide, good energy that would be attached to that that shield that was made for a person that had a significance within that person's life and their spiritual understanding. So you can add various things on there if you want to. Here I use those I forget what you call these, but they were my daughters, so I'm like old, I think like boots or something like that. So I incorporated those into the shield, and that looks really nice. So it can be something like that. I should have a little more variety of examples, but I don't on that. But feel free to do some research and find out how you want to represent your shield, your medicine shield. Once you have that, another component that you'll have to do is create your lacing. You can create lacing, you can buy it in a bundle and use it, but you can also create your own, which I would recommend, because then it's going to be the same thickness as your shield hide. And what I do with that is I'll take a scrap chunk. You can do it in a perfect circle all the way around and it'll look really neat. It doesn't matter though. You can go like this, and I'll start with the outside. and I make it into a circle or an oval. And then if you have a size like this and your shield's smaller, it's going to be just fine for length. And if not, I'll show you how to add on more. And I'm just going to walk that in all the way around. I don't mean to ignore you.
Oh, you're fine.
Follow the line. Yay.
Are
Are you following the line, Jeremy? He did good in when he did the Flint Nappy. We recorded him too.
That's awesome. I want to take that too. I was just too busy.
And what's the other one that you taught to?
So
At Lattle. There you go.
Yeah,
Ah, for the life of me, I couldn't remember that to say it.
Then your thickness should be, again, like a 1/4 of an inch. You don't want it too thick. It's going to be hard to lace it through the holes that you create. But you also don't want it to be too thin because you don't want it to tear. But unlike making a drum, it doesn't have to be that tight. You don't have to worry about exact tightness. With working with like hides, it's going to tighten and loosen depending on the climate and region that you're at. So if you see these shields here that I have, and you see some of them are bowed, that's pretty common, especially during the winter time because it gets colder, there's less moisture, so it's going to tighten up. So if you have one of your shields close to a window, chances are, wintertime, if there's a draft, it will move on you. It will be tighter. Then comes summertime when there's more humidity, it will become softer. Just like, you know, tuning up a drum, you know, you hold it up to either like a heater or to the sun, and it would tighten and it would tune. These are going to fluctuate too, depending on the climate that you're at. So they'll be bent more when it gets colder. They'll be flatter more towards summertime, just with the atmosphere. When you create your lace, that's about all that you really need for these, unless it's larger. We're going to start soaking them. Now, depending on what kind of hide you use, it's going to soak for different amounts of time. You'll hear people say like, oh, you got to soak it for this amount of time. You know, that's only really true if you're going to make something bigger or it's thick hide like buffalo or elk. It's going to take more time to soak. With deer hide, it's going to take less time to soak because of how thin it is. But you don't want to over soak it either, which is hard to do. I mean, you could leave it in there for a couple of days and I don't think it would start breaking down yet. But if you have it in there for an extended period of time, since it is hide, it will start to get too soft and then it'll start to deteriorate on you where you can't use it. But with these, I think you can put them in water for a couple hours and it'll be totally malleable. And after a couple hours, it should look like this. That's kind of what it's going to look like. This is all pre-done. And I'll start the lacing process, and then I'm going to give this one actually to Jeremy so he can get going on it, because then you'll have one to bring home, because you have to get wet and you have to dry it before you can actually do anything on it for your artwork. So it's kind of a two-part process. So I'll get this started, then I'll give it to him, then I'll answer any questions if anybody has any questions in regard to that. If you're done with the one you made, you can soak it or not, depending on if you think you're going to do lacing. Because you could do this, it'll take like probably 20 minutes, but it's going to take you maybe a couple hours before that gets wet enough to work it. But you can construct it 100%, bring it home, give it a day to dry, and then we'll give you some supplies. Just bring it back next workshop, so you can do all the artwork on it as well.
Oh, okay.
That's cool. I was trying to think of like how do you set it up, you know, so
Sure.
it's a two-part. But so here's my lacing. This is wet, and what I usually do is kind of like under, over, under, over. You can spiral it too. That's harder to tighten. I've tried both techniques. I've seen both techniques, but this technique I like the best. And this is a little short, so I have two different parts, and I'll kind of start it. I'll give this over to Jeremy to finish, and then when he gets through that, I'll show you how to do the 4 directions. Then I'll give it back to him, and in between that time, we'll talk and discuss, like, if you have any questions. I can give you all a list if you give your email to Jen. So you have the list, you have the supplies, and you can kind of make this on your own time, because it really doesn't take long. And if you have children and kids, it's really something that I think is really great. So anyways, I'm going to start on the face. The rougher side is going to be on your inside. The softer side is going to be on your outside. And I'm going to start on this side here, because that way when I do the tightening, it's going to go this way opposed to the other way where it's going to bend up over the rim. So I usually pull it all the way through. Leave yourself a tail. It works really good if you create a little knot. That's going to prevent it from slipping out. It's going to be, it's like a snake in and out, or like a prairie dog popping up in and out of holes. It's easy to forget that, and eventually you'll be halfway through, and then you'll loop it up around the outside. And like, I gotta redo it. So I still make that mistake. Back. You see how it kind of looks almost like staples. So I'll go over like the supplies that you need while he's lacing that. Larger needles work really good if you can see those for your sinew. I would recommend using sinew. You can use regular beading string too, but traditionally, like you would have had used sinew on there. And then for your feathers, you can use any kind of feathers you want. It's kind of hard to judge the size, but you know, like these ones here are probably a little too big for that shield, but it's kind of challenging to get. And what I will use is felt for the outside. You can use like really old clothes too. Like I've seen this before where it's old clothes of the kid that they used and they put on their shield for their felt. I typically use felt. When I taught this at McLaughlin and Paula, we always used felt. But for your feathers, you can glue these if you want, but you don't need to. You create it so it loops down and over. And then I will tie it, and I'll lace it up. Then that little loop that you have will then go into your shield. I usually start at the bottom, and I'll flip it over. I know this is probably hard to see. There's no real science or technique behind it, yet I've seen all different ways in which it's been done. But if you know of any other ways too, definitely incorporate that teaching into what you make. Because shields are very common in the plains region. but depending too of like the tribe, there's going to be variation in the history and how you go about making it or the philosophy behind it. So feel free to integrate what you know. I always say, like, as a teacher, you know, I integrate what I know, and then based on what my students know, it's kind of like a puzzle that comes together and helps kind of revitalize and keep like traditional arts alive in like contemporary society. And once you get it wrapped around, I'm kind of doing this fast because I want to show you, you can cut it. If you've never worked with sinew before, definitely don't use a lighter like you would if you're beading. I made that mistake before. I made a dream catcher when I was teaching in McLaughlin. I was waiting for the kids and I fringed the lace and it was gone. It was all beaded around, so you could still go in and fix it if you want. I wanted to cry. So, but anyways.
Do not do what Derek says.
So anyways, that's how it looks. And you see you have this little loop on top. And there's a couple different ways you can do it depending on your diameter. Again, this one, I just poked a hole at the very bottom and I laced it up and then tied it in the back. If it's larger like this one, I've actually made 2 holes and then attached them in the back, and that way it'll lay flat. If you only have 1 hole, chances are it's going to lay like this. And it's going to be a little bit more frustrating if you wanted to have a nice flush section like that. And if I can find my needle. And the reason for having a larger needle, you can use a smaller one too, but it's really challenging to get your thread through there. Otherwise, you don't have to use the whole thing. I mean, you can split it, of course. Like that. And then if we were at that stage where we had one that needed it, you know, you'd poke your 2 holes when it was still wet with your awl, and then you use your needle, you go through that hole that you created, then you put it through on the back side, and you can knot it, and it'll lay flush and flat. And you can look at images of shields, and you'll see different techniques of placement anyways. You know, it doesn't necessarily always have to be on the bottom. It could be on the side, or it could just have 1, or it could have 2. There's a lot of different ways to go about making it. And that's how you attach your feathers on there, or even like your horsehair. If you had horsehair, I have horsehair, I just didn't bring any, but you can see that too, that will be integrated onto shields, and also like dream catchers and things like that. And that's kind of the same process where you tie it off, you flip it over, then you tie it again, and it creates a loophole that then can be attached to your project. What else are we going to cover? Okay, so I'll go over materials. A ring, unless you want to try to go about actually creating your own metal hoop. Shield in Lakota is Wahachanka, is how you pronounce your shield. Rawhide for medicine shields, I recommend using deer. It's thinner, it's easier to work with, you can soak it. And then I can go over the painting technique while he's still working on that. Sinew, awl, larger needles, scissors, felt. And if you think you need it, you can use glue. And then we'll go over your paints. Did I cover everything, Jen?
I think so.
Everything. Okay.
All scissors, feather, deer hide, your stencil. I think that's it.
Okay. And then I'll show you the paints, everyone. Now, again, I always say this, you know, you can make it as historically accurate as you would like as an artist, how you perceive your artwork to be and how you perceive how you would like to go about making it. It's very common to use easier supplies. I'd be like, traditionally you would ground manganese, rock, pigment, even plant pigment from your local region, and that using water can create your pigment that then would be applied to your shield. What I use here, because it's a lot easier, especially if I'm teaching in a classroom and I used to be teaching at the K-12 level, was to have things that were already done and accessible. So I'd use India inks. And India inks are very similar to like tattoo ink. So if you use an acrylic base or an oil base or a water base, those paints are going to sit on your surface and they'll have a tendency to crack because of that as the hide flexes due to like weather. Even like if you're making a drum, like I made drums quite a bit, and your chanchegas, and what I use for a drum would be India ink too, especially with like, you know, striking it, you won't lose pigment or paint. It recedes it and goes into the actual hide opposed to sitting on the surface. And these aren't the cheapest, but if you know what colors you're going to use, you can get the small containers. Even a small little container like this will last you forever. Once your rawhide dries, I recommend either creating stencils. If you struggle drawing, you can find designs and create a stencil off of that using the internet. But other than that, you can freehand when it's dry, right on there with a pencil. And once you've done that, then you can apply your paints, like these, the India inks. They work really nice, get vibrant colors. That's what I use for every single one of these. And I mean, some of these, this was like 10 years ago already, and it still looks as vibrant as it did the day that I made it. And then two, if you're good at freehanding with a paintbrush, go for it. If you struggle with that, you can use India inked pens, and that can give you precision lines like this. Again, depending on how accurate historically you want to make this, you can, or how modern you want to go about doing this, you can as well as an artist. It just gives you a variety. You can even buy manganese grounded up already if you want to do that, but you don't know which rocks would be used best for what. Because that's a whole nother teaching in and of itself to learn how to make pigments and paints. Are you good with that? Okay, then I'll show you how to make the 4 directions. So here is it completely laced. Now what you're going to end up doing, this is going to be hard to show you, but I'm going to basically tighten it as it's flat on here. And I usually do that starting one way, or I can split it and do it at the bottom so everything tightens up on the one side. You'll see once you start pulling it, it's going to start wrapping over. You don't want to go too fast because it's going to move your ring too far on the other side and it's going to be uneven. So you just want it basically to the point where the ring isn't going to pop out. And then you finish it up on your other side. And it's going to look like that. See that. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross these over and I'm going to tighten it down so the back is relatively flat and there's even amount of hide all the way, because when this tightens up, that ring is still going to want to slide out. That's why you give it that much space around the edge to fold over so it doesn't do that. If that does happen, it means that your stencil was too little compared to the ring. And you don't want to get it too tight because then it's going to buckle quite a bit. Then, you know, when it gets cold, it's going to buckle even more. I'm going to take out this knot. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to leave my tail. I like to have a tail because I'm going to show you how to make it so it hangs. I'm just going to knot it once so it doesn't slip. Now I want to bring it straight down. I'm going to go down and up on that lacing. So it's even. I want to just taut, not tight, but taut. Then I'm going to go under that first line, and I want to find it even over here, outside in, that. And I want to keep that little loop right there because I'm going to need that. And I'm going to go over and under it and across. I'm going to tighten it, but I don't want to tighten it too much because I don't want to lose this in the center down here. Then over the top. Across. Tighten it up just a little bit more. Back under. It's best if you can have that a little bit longer so you can attach it back up to here so you don't have a knot right in the middle. This one was a little too short and I don't want to pull it anymore. So I'm going to bring this down since we're a little short on lace. And then I'm just going to make my hide hook right there. So I can eventually hang this.
Gordon said, "What's up, Derek?"
Hey. And there you have a little hanger so you can put it on a wall and hang it without it being seen. It would have been better if I could have went all the way up. If I would have took more time, I would have went through this and flattened it. Craftsmanship is definitely important, but you can definitely untie it and make it perfectly flat if you want to. Like whenever I see a drum, I always flip it over and I look at the lacing because that says a lot, you know, that craftsmanship with the lacing. Then once that's done, and when it dries out, he will, and I've already had a pre-cut, I mean, you can do it on the side, you can do it like this. Look at examples and get some good ideas of how you want yours to look, how you want your shield, your hachaka to look. And basically that process, like this, what I do is I center it, I poke my awl, I can give you one of these too so you have it. I poke it through both the fabric and also my hide at the same time, and I'll tie down both these ends just so it's stationary, and then I will poke my other holes and I'll lace then like that around until I'm back to the other side with rawhide, and that attaches my felt to the top. And then what he'll eventually do is he'll poke 2 holes, and then he's going to do this process so then he can attach it to whatever area he likes. Once it's dry all the way, then I recommend drawing out your design so it's outlined. Paint it first, and then do your actual line work. That way you don't overlap or anything like that. That's the finishing that makes it all very clean. Other than that, I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions?
Amy, do you have any questions?
Here's your single. You're just going to cut
Nope, I don't have any questions.
Okay, we'll get that description to you. I'll give the email to Derek and he can get that description sent to you.
Great, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you
Good
for
job, Derek.
attending.
Yeah, I hope you
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
We did, yes.
Cool,
Thanks.
yeah.
No problem. See you later.
Bye.